Well, a solemn remembrance this morning. Today marks 25 years since the disappearance of Chandra Levy, which was a case that once gripped the nation and still remains unsolved today. Levy, pictured here in 2001 in D.C. when she was an intern, a federal intern with the Prisons Bureau. And when her remains were found a year after this picture, the investigation has faced years of setbacks, controversy, and unanswered questions. Joining us now to break down what happened here and where the case stands today is Joshua Edenheimer, former D.C. Police Assistant Chief and now with the University of Virginia's Center for Public Safety and Justice. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. It is hard to believe it has been 25 years since this case gripped the nation and us right here in D.C.
I agree. When your producers called and they wanted to talk about this case, I also can't believe it's been 25 years.
Right,
Uh,
right.
but it was a defining time, though, I think, in the city's history.
What you were with MPD around that time. What do you remember about the climate? Also, the police department's condition in the early 2000s when this case really unfolded.
Well, I mean, just to set it up, I mean, this was a sensational story at the
Mhm.
time. It had all of the elements of a salacious drama. Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, a missing person, and then a murder where a body was found a year later of an attractive young woman who, as you mentioned, was a federal intern who was involved in a sexual relationship with a married congressman. I mean, this just dominated the news in Washington at the time.
Mhm.
And this intensity of attention on the case, I did think contributed to some of the problems that the police department and the United States Attorney's Office faced. And I think it led to problems with the case.
Interesting, as being a member of the media back then, I remember a lot of time was focused at staking out the congressman's apartment back then in the Adams Morgan, Mount Pleasant area. So it looks like, you know, a lot of time was sort of diverted into what did not pan out, at least at the time, to be any really strong leads. But in your opinion, where did the investigation fall short in those critical early days?
Well, I think you're right. I think the police investigators missed key evidence. I mean, information related to suspects and witnesses and intel, they were very, very focused on the
Hmm.
congressman. And even forensically, forensic evidence was lost because of mismanagement early on. Grid searches of Rock Creek Park were done by, the police cadets at the academy in very difficult terrain. There was not a proper grid search conducted. It's not like they had drones back then that could map it with experienced people in grid searches. So I think that led to not finding her body for a year. And so that's a year that her body was exposed to the elements. And so key evidence was lost.
And we just saw there, what's known as a perp walk of the suspect that was arrested for this murder after Chandra Levy's body was discovered in Rock Creek Park. But he would end up being deported. What happens to the case then? His case is thrown out. He is thrown out of the country. And then what happens?
Right. So move forward a couple of years. A suspect was identified, by the way, with information that was available and known years before. He was arrested, convicted, but then there were problems in the trial, problems with the prosecutors and witnesses. Prosecutors made some significant errors. In fact, two prosecutors were disciplined in the case.
Mhm.
So the charges were eventually dropped, and the suspect, uh, uh, Ingmar Guandike, was deported to El Salvador.
Now, it's so interesting. In looking up this case, we see her parents still, they were a really pivotal part of this investigation. We got to know who her parents were. So let me ask you, where does this case stand now? Are there any new leads, any justice and rest for this family?
I think there's not a sense of closure, and for the family, I mean, we did have a suspect identified and convicted, but then those charges were dropped, and we don't know where the suspect is. We know he's deported to El Salvador, but what is he doing in El Salvador? In looking at what happened, I do think it's important to note
Hmm.
that this was an unusual time in the city's history, and I think that explains a little bit of what happened. DC, went bankrupt, and there were corruption problems in the government, and they were emerging from the federal takeover of the district government and the police department. And the police department, their resources, training, experience were really depleted.
Right.
The new chief of police, Chuck Ramsey, and his deputy, Terry Gaynor, they were early in their tenures. They made transformational improvements in the police department, but this was, that takes time. So I don't think the police department was as refined as it is today. Another key thing is that 9/11 happened
Right
4 months
after.
after she disappeared,
Right.
and that changed the landscape as well.
So much more to talk about, but we have to end it there. We appreciate your time this morning. We'll be right back.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.